There was a time when the world had only one dominant voice, Washington. But that era is fading. India, the world's largest democracy and a rising tech superpower, justified the West boldly, publicly, strategically. And Trump, well, he's furious. But this is bigger than Trump. It's the story of a 21st century shift in power away from control and towards sovereignty. This is the story of how India said no and didn't set flinch. Look, sanctions are basically just a tool for control. That's what people don't get. It's not about justice or democracy or anything noble. It's about leverage. And the West, especially the United States, has been using sanctions like a hammer. You step out of line, you get hit. You trade with the wrong country, buy oil from the wrong guy, shake hands with someone Washington doesn't approve of. Boom, your economy gets punished. The thing is that strategy used to work. After World War II, the US had unmatched power militarily, economically, technologically. So yeah, if they said don't do this, most countries listened because they had to. The global banking system was in their hands. SWIFT was under their influence. Trade routes, logistics, even information. It was like they held the keys to the world's operating system. But here's the problem. That system is outdated. It's kind of like trying to run 25 software on a 1990s processor. The world's different now. You've got powerful economies that aren't dependent on the US dollar the way they used to be. You've got countries like India, China, Russia building parallel systems, new alliances, even alternate currencies. And the more the US uses sanctions, the more they push those countries to innovate. It's like trying to stop a leak with duct tape while the dam's cracking behind you. Now with India, what's happening is fascinating. Washington expected India to follow the script. Say the right things, buy from the right countries, avoid energy deals with Russia. But India said no, not rudely, not defiantly, just logically. They said this is in our national interest. Cheap oil helps us grow. So we'll do it. That's not disobedience, that's independence. The West still treats sanctions like a universal remote control. Press a button and the rest of the world changes channel. But it's not working anymore. The batteries are dying. The software is broken because the rest of the world has options now. They're building their own remotes, and what you're seeing isn't a rebellion, it's a system reboot. Countries are realizing they can stand on their own. Sanctions are becoming background noise. Annoying, yes, but not enough to stop momentum. And every time the West pulls that lever, they lose a little more influence. It's like overusing antibiotics. Eventually the world builds immunity. India isn't trying to start a fight. It's just refusing to be programmed. That's a big shift because once one major country breaks out of the system, others follow. That's how networks evolve. That's how empires fall. Not with a bang, but with too many people quietly opting out. So yeah, the sanction game. It's tired, it's clunky, it's obsolete, and India just proved it. People used to think of India as the quiet one in the room. Massive population, huge economy and waiting-rich culture, ancient civilization, but geopolitically kind of reserved. It was like the world expected India to just sit at the edge of the table, smile politely, do business and avoid confrontation. And for a long time, India played that role. It wasn't weak, just cautious, non-alignment, strategic ambiguity, keeping its options open. But that era, it's over. Today, India is not asking for a seat at the table. It's building its own table. Under Modi, there's been a mindset shift. It's not about shouting or making enemies. It's about self-respect. It's about clarity. India is saying, look, we're not here to serve someone else's agenda. We're not a client state. We're not a pawn in your chess game. We're a sovereign power. We'll make decisions based on what's good for India, not what pleases Washington, not what pleases Moscow, not what fits someone else's narrative. This isn't rebellion. It's not some anti-West crusade. It's just what adulthood looks like on the geopolitical stage. You don't live your life based on someone else's preferences, and neither should a billion-person democracy. You can see it everywhere now. India signs defense deals with the US and then does oil deals with Russia. It joins the Quad with Japan and Australia and still shows up at BRICS summits with China. It invests in Silicon Valley but builds its own AI infrastructure at home. It partners with NASA and launches its own moon mission. It's not picking sides. It's playing every side smartly, surgically, with one clear goal: Indian interest first. That kind of independence, it makes the old powers nervous. Because for decades, global strategy was simple. Get countries to pick a team. You're either with us or against us. But India is saying, no, we're with ourselves. We don't need to be managed. We don't need approval. And that's a hard thing for empires to accept when the colony becomes the competitor. It's also worth pointing out India is not flexing muscles just to make a scene. This is strategic calm, not chaos. It's quiet strength, no threats, no theatrics, just consistent action, defending borders, building infrastructure, growing the economy, expanding influence. That's what real power looks like, not noise leverage. And if the West thought it could pressure India into falling in line, it miscalculated. India doesn't need to shout to be heard anymore. Its actions are louder than its voice. It doesn't follow the script. It writes its own. That's why this moment matters. Because when the silent giant starts to speak clearly and act boldly, the entire global balance begins to shift. Trump is furious. And honestly, it's not just about oil. It's about something much bigger. The collapse of American influence and the fact that India just proved it. See, Trump operates on a simple formula. Dominance equals respect. You apply pressure, people fold. You threaten tariffs, people comply. You flex your economic muscle, and the world steps back in line. That's the old playbook. And to be fair, it worked for decades. The US was the center of gravity. If Washington wanted something, most countries gave it. Not out of loyalty, but out of necessity. But now the world has changed and Trump doesn't like it. When India refused to cut energy ties with Russia, Trump saw it as disobedience. From his point of view, it was a betrayal, because in his worldview, allies should follow orders. The US puts money into your economy, buys your goods, gives you a handshake at the White House, and in return, you play by the rules set in Washington. But India didn't step flinch. India bought Russian oil, a lot of it. Even when Western media screamed sanctions, even when the G7 threatened consequences, India kept trading. Why? Because it made sense. It was affordable, it was secure, and it benefited Indian citizens. That's what a sovereign country does. It acts in its own interest. But to Trump, that looked like defiance. So he hit back with what he knows: tariffs, a 25% hike on Indian goods. And not just that, he hinted at more. Secondary sanctions, trade restrictions, financial pressure. It was a warning shot, a message: obey or face the consequences. But here's the problem. It didn't work. India didn't apologize. It didn't retreat. It stood firm. And that's why Trump is truly furious. Not because India disobeyed, but because America's threats no longer scare rising powers. This is a pattern now. The tools of influence that once gave the US total control, they're dull, outdated. Tariffs, sanctions, military posture. These labors are losing effectiveness, especially with countries like India that are economically powerful, politically confident, and no longer desperate for American approval. Trump's anger is the emotional side of a bigger geopolitical truth. The unipolar moment is over. The days of one superpower dictating terms to the world are ending. And Trump, who still views power in binary terms, winner versus loser, obedient versus rebellious, isn't equipped to process that. India's rise is not a rebellion, it's a recalibration. It's a country that has spent decades playing nice, finally stepping into its own. And the fact that it's doing so without asking permission, that's what's triggering the fury in Washington. Trump's real problem isn't with India. His real problem is that the system that once made the US untouchable is fading, and India is simply one of the first to walk away from the shadow. And that, to someone who thrives on control, feels like the ultimate betrayal. People always talk about ideology, alliances, democracy, but when it comes to survival, it's really about energy. That's the foundation of everything. You don't run a nation on speeches, you run it on fuel, and India understands this better than most. India's relationship with Russian energy isn't some rebellion against the West. It's a smart, calculated move based on one thing: national interest. You've got a country with over 1.4 billion people, one of the fastest growing economies in the world, and massive demand for power, fuel, infrastructure, and future scalability. If you want to lift millions out of poverty, build a manufacturing base, and become a real global competitor, You need energy that's cheap, reliable, and geopolitically stable. Now take Russia, sanctioned by the West, cut off from a lot of its traditional markets. Russia's looking for new buyers, and they're offering steep discounts on oil, sometimes 20–30% below global prices. That's not just a good deal. It's a strategic advantage for any country that can take it. And India took it. While Europe was scrambling for energy, fighting over expensive LG shipments, cutting back on consumption and dealing with inflation, India locked in oil at cut-rate prices quietly, efficiently. No drama, just good economics. That's not about siding with Russia. That's about building leverage. India is saying, we'll buy from whoever gives us the best value. Period. And that's what a sovereign power does. It doesn't buy loyalty. It buys opportunity. But here's the thing, the West doesn't like that. They see it as disobedience. They wanted countries to isolate Russia completely, diplomatically, economically, financially. They assumed that global pressure would choke Russia off. But countries like India saw through that. They understood that cutting off a major energy supplier doesn't hurt just the supplier, it hurts the buyer too. So India refused to play that game. They paid for oil in rupees and rubles, bypassed dollar-dominated channels, and negotiated directly with Moscow. That's innovation. That's independence. And yeah, that's also a threat to Western dominance, especially the financial systems that underpin global trade. Because if India can buy Russian oil outside of the US dollar system and do it at scale, then others can too. And that's the real danger for Washington. It's not the oil, it's the president. What India is building is a new model. One where national interest trumps Western approval, one where smart economics beats outdated ideology, and one where energy is treated not as a political weapon, but as a tool for growth. This is what real global strategy looks like. It's not about loyalty, it's about long-term thinking. India isn't picking a side in someone else's war. It's picking a path for its own future. And that future runs on smart deals, stable partners, and energy security, not lectures from across the ocean. The fundamental miscalculation Washington made wasn't about oil or tariffs or even Russia. It was about mindset. It assumed India would obey, that it would fold under pressure, that it would act like a subordinate in a system designed and controlled by the West. And that assumption, that outdated 20th century assumption, is now collapsing in real time. For decades, US foreign policy has been built around influence. Soft power, hard power, economic power. Washington became so used to setting the rules that it forgot to check whether anyone still wanted to play the game. They believed countries like India would always need approval, that they'd trade autonomy for access, loyalty for investments, obedience for inclusion. But India is not interested in being managed. Not anymore. This isn't the 1990s. India isn't struggling to find its place in the world. It has one. It earned it. It's the 5th largest economy on the planet, soon to be 3rd. It's the largest democracy. It's a nuclear power, a space power, a digital power. It doesn't need a seat at someone else's table. It's building its own. And Washington didn't see that coming. They thought the threat of tariffs 25% or more would scare India into backing away from Russian energy deals. They thought sanctions, diplomatic pressure, and media narratives would force compliance. But all that did was prove how little the US understands the new India. India didn't panic. It didn't lash out. It didn't even respond emotionally. It just kept going quietly, confidently, and with precision. Because this isn't about confrontation. It's about conviction. India's leadership made it clear national interest comes first, always. And that means deciding who to trade with, who to ally with, and how to navigate global politics without needing anyone's permission. And here's where the miscalculation gets even bigger. Washington assumed that influence would last forever, that economic dominance was permanent. But in a multipolar world, no single country holds that kind of leverage. Trade can shift, alliances can evolve. Technology can decentralize power faster than any government can control it. And India understands that it's playing the long game. This isn't rebellion, it's sucks evolution. When the US reacts with threats and punishment instead of dialogue and respect, it exposes its insecurity. It shows that it still sees power as a hierarchy, top-down, one-directional. But India doesn't operate like that. It doesn't need to topple the West. It just needs to assert itself. And that's exactly what it's doing. So yes, Washington miscalculated. It expected obedience, it got independence. It wanted control, it got competition. And the more it pushes, the more it reveals how much the global order has already shifted. India isn't stepping out of line, it's stepping into its own. And the real question now isn't whether India will obey. It's whether the West can adapt to a world where it no longer gives the orders. Most people are still underestimating India. That's the first mistake. They're thinking about the old India, the developing nation, the outsourcing hub, the place where things were cheap. But that image is outdated, totally obsolete. What we're seeing now is not India rising. It's India already risen quietly, strategically, systematically. India is the 5th largest economy in the world. Soon it'll be 3rd behind only the US and China. But what's more important than the number is the direction. India is moving forward, and it's doing it fast. Powered by infrastructure, innovation, and internal confidence. You look at the numbers, 7% plus GDP growth year after year. A young population, median age around 28, over 800 million internet users, one of the biggest consumer markets on Earth, and now, with artificial intelligence, semiconductors, renewable energy and space tech, India is going from user to creator, from being the back end to becoming the brain of the global system. And here's the key. India is not copying anyone. It's not trying to be the next America or the next China. It's building a third model, democratic, decentralized, and deeply rooted in its own civilizational identity. That's what makes it so powerful, because you can't outcompete authenticity. You can't outscale a billion minds that believe in their own future. Politically, India has learned how to play every angle without losing itself. It maintains ties with Russia, cooperates with the US, trades with the EU, works with the Middle East, and still builds its own defense industry at home. That's balance, that's sovereignty. That's the kind of quiet power most Western analysts don't know how to measure. And the West is noticing, some with admiration, others with fear. Because when you have a country that's not only growing, but also refusing to be controlled, that's disruptive. It's not hostile, just independent. But in a world used to dependency, independence looks like defiance. India doesn't want to dominate the world. That's what makes it so different. It just wants to be left alone to lead itself, to build, to grow, to innovate on its own terms. And that's a revolutionary idea in a system built on influence, intervention, and leverage. The real proof of power isn't how loud you are. It's how much weight your silence carries. And India's silence lately, it's been deafening. It doesn't respond to every criticism. It doesn't justify every move. It just acts and lets the results speak. And the results are speaking louder than ever. India is landing spacecraft on the moon. It's building the world's biggest digital public infrastructure. It's exporting vaccines, software, satellites, and solar energy. It's feeding 1 billion people and educating hundreds of millions. This isn't potential, it's performance. So when people say India is rising, they're already behind. India sips not on the runway anymore, its debt's in the air. For a long time, the world operated under a single illusion that one country, one currency, one ideology could run the entire planet. That illusion is over. We're no longer moving toward a multipolar world. We're already in it. The United States isn't collapsing, let's be clear. But its monopoly on global influence, that's gone irrevocably. And the faster world leaders come to terms with this reality, the more prepared they'll be for what's next. Because what we're seeing right now is a complete rebalancing of global power, not based on ideology, not based on military alliances, but based on capability, sovereignty, and strategic value. And India isn't just part of that shift, it's shaping it. You've got the US still strong, still deeply innovative, but more internally divided than ever. You've got China, fast state-controlled but increasingly distrusted. Then you have India, the world's largest democracy, young, loud, agile, and not tied to anyone's playbook. This is what makes the current moment so profound. We're not just witnessing new alliances. We're witnessing the birth of new gravitational centers, new orbits of influence. India's alignment with Russia on energy, with the US on tech, with the Middle East on trade, with the global south on diplomacy. That's not contradiction. That's a blueprint for post-unipolar diplomacy. Old world powers used to demand loyalty. You're either with us or against us. That kind of binary thinking, it doesn't work anymore. Not in a world where energy, data, and innovation are decentralized. Not in a world where AI and quantum computing are going to rewrite everything from warfare to finance to medicine. India understands this. That's why it doesn't sign on to every Western narrative. That's why it buys discounted Russian oil. If it helps its people, that's why it builds 5G at home, sends missions to the moon, and still sits at the table with both Washington and Moscow. Because power in the new world isn't about domination, it's about optionality. The more choices you have, the more leverage you hold. And India has options, not just in foreign policy, but in manufacturing, in energy, in defense, in space. It can pivot, it can partner, and most importantly, it can say no, which in diplomacy is the ultimate form of strength. The West still sees the world through a Cold War lens. Enemies, allies, deterrence, punishment. But India is looking 20 years ahead towards self-sufficiency, toward strategic ambiguity, toward digital sovereignty. And that sits the future. The multipolar world is not chaotic. It's more democratic. It's messier, sure, but it gives more countries a real voice. It allows new powers to rise without starting wars. It enables collaboration without coercion. So the question isn't whether the multipolar world is coming, it's already here. And India is instead just adapting to it. India is mastering it. If there's one truth Western powers need to understand urgently, it's this. The era of control is over. You can't sanction your way to loyalty anymore. You can't shame nations into obedience. And you definitely can't lecture rising powers while ignoring your own contradictions. The new global order doesn't run on fear. It runs on mutual respect. For decades, the West operated on a formula. Economic aid in exchange for influence, military protection in exchange for loyalty, and ideological approval in exchange for access to trade. That system worked when the world was unipolar, when the West was the only game in town. But now nations have options. They can trade with China, negotiate with Russia, invest in Africa, partner with the Middle East, build their own platforms, their own currencies, their own satellite networks. And when countries like India choose their own path, it's not rebellion, it studs evolution. India doesn't want to be lectured, it wants to be heard. It doesn't want charity, it wants partnership. It doesn't want a seat at someone else's table, it's building its own. So when the US or the EU reacts to India's energy deals or foreign policy choices with outrage or threats, it's not just ineffective, it's tone deaf. Because what they're missing is the core of India's new stance. Strategic self-respect. India will cooperate, yes, but it won't sit conform. And this isn't unique to India. You see it across the global south. You see it in Brazil. You see it in Indonesia. You even see shades of it in Turkey. The world isn't breaking apart. It's simply recalibrating, moving away from control-based diplomacy and toward interest-based diplomacy. And if the West wants to remain relevant in this equation, it needs to adapt. Start by treating emerging powers as equals, not as junior partners. Stop framing global leadership as a one-way street. Recognize that cooperation can exist without alignment. That friendship doesn't require submission. Want India's partnership? Offer something real, not warnings. Respect its need to diversify, to secure energy, to build tech capacity, to uplift its 1.44 billion citizens. Don't make every decision a test of loyalty. That Cold War mindset, it subs obsolete. The US should be innovating new forms of collaboration, decentralized, flexible, win-win platforms, not pyramids, networks, not empires. Imagine a world where the West partners with India on clean energy, quantum computing, semiconductors, space exploration, without demanding it chooses between Washington and Moscow. That's the kind of thinking that unlocks the future, because the world doesn't set one another empire. It wants dignity. And when you give that, you get something far more powerful than control trust. So if the West truly wants to lead in the 21st century, it needs to stop punishing independence and start respecting it. Because in this new world, the ones who thrive aren't the ones who dominate. They're the ones who collaborate with humility, with vision, with respect. Look, we're not going back to the old world. That version of global order where one or two superpowers dictated the rules for everyone else, that's done. It's not breaking down. It's already broken. What we're witnessing now is the rise of a truly multipolar world. And it's not a threat. It's an upgrade. You can feel it everywhere. Power is no longer concentrated in Washington or Brussels or Beijing alone. It's distributed. It's adaptive. It's emerging simultaneously from New Delhi, São Paulo, Jakarta, Nairobi, and more countries that were once on the sidelines are now rewriting the rules. They're not asking permission anymore. They're moving, building, leading. And honestly, that SIP's a good thing. The idea that one country or one alliance should steer the future for everyone else. It's not just arrogant, it's inefficient, it slows innovation, it stifles cooperation, it breeds resentment. The future doesn't belong to empires. It belongs to networks, systems that are decentralized, resilient, and driven by shared interest rather than forced allegiance. India is a perfect example of this shift. It's not trying to dominate anyone. It's just standing up finally on its own terms, trading with who it wants, partnering where it benefits, saying no when it needs to. That's not fragmentation. That's balance. That's exactly what a healthy global system should look like. More centers of gravity, more voices at the table, more innovation from more angles. Think about it like the internet. The internet didn't grow because one server controlled everything. It scaled because it became distributed nodes everywhere, constantly adapting, sharing, evolving. The same thing is now happening geopolitically. Countries are becoming nodes of power, influence, and development. That's how we future-proof the world. So yeah, the old powers are nervous because when power multiplies, control fades. You can predict every outcome anymore. You can write the rules unilaterally. But here sits the truth. That sets progress. That's how real global collaboration begins, when no single player gets to decide everything. When we move from dominance to dialogue, from monopoly to multiparity. And this is where leadership really matters. Not by trying to drag countries back into outdated alliances or punishing them for independence, but by designing systems that allow many powers to thrive simultaneously. We need new institutions, new frameworks, new thinking. We need diplomacy that's modular, partnerships that are dynamic, alliances that are flexible. And above all, we need to recognize that the future is not a chessboard, it's a network. And in our world, everyone matters, not because they're powerful, but because they're connected. That's the world we're building now. It's complex, it's chaotic, but it's also incredibly exciting. The unipolar dream is over. The multipolar reality is here. And India, it's not just part of that new world. It's helping lead it. You know, history has these moments. Moments where the power lines shift, where the center of gravity moves and the world doesn't notice it right away. But it happens quietly, irreversibly. This is one of those moments. India is not just making moves. It's making a statement, not in words, not in headlines, but in choices. Smart, bold, unapologetic choices. It's buying energy on its own terms, building tech on its own soil, forging alliances that serve its own future, not someone else's past. And it's doing it without needing permission from Washington, Brussels, or Beijing. This isn't about being anti-West or pro-Russia or anything in between. This is about being pro-India. And that idea that a nation can rise without aligning, without begging, without playing by inherited rules, that idea is the future. The world isn't unipolar anymore. It's not even bipolar. It's becoming multi-vector, decentralized, distributed, and dynamic. And India is one of the architects of that future. The West can get angry. It can issue warnings. It can throw around sanctions. But here SIP is the truth. And it SIP's a truth. Washington hasn't spoilly accepted yet. The era of control is over. You can't bully 1 billion+ people into submission. You can't tariff away sovereignty. You can't sanction independence out of existence. India is playing the long game. It's not reacting emotionally. It's calculating, building, thinking generationally, not just politically. And that shift is what real power looks like now. It's not about dominance. It's about resilience. It's not about obedience. It's about self-mastery. It's not about fear. It's about vision. India has that vision and it's no longer afraid to act on it. So yeah, Trump might be furious. The West might be frustrated. But India's just getting started.